Hi everyone, and welcome to video number 2. So if you're following along so far, you have already read the Bob and Burglary fact pattern. You've also already read Correa, and you've had a chance to look at the elements of the statute. And you understand that the big issue we're trying to resolve is whether Bob committed burglary. But to do that, we're going to break down the analysis and we're going to do an IRAC on each one of the elements in the burglary statute. We're going to jump ahead and do the IRAC that pertains to dwelling, partly because I actually enjoyed this case and I enjoy it for class discussion purposes, and also partly because for this particular legal issue, we don't necessarily have to go in order. So I've already asked you to read Correa, but what I didn't ask you to do, but I'm going to ask you now, is, if you haven't done it, is let's talk about together here what happened in Correa. And I hope you can see through what we're going to do now is the importance of the case briefing step. Because if you've already briefed Correa or any other cases that are pertinent to your legal issue, it makes finding that rule of law and writing the IRAC infinitely easier. So the first thing we're going to do is kind of do like a mini case brief of Correa. Because if you think about how the IRAC comes together with the issue sentence, and then a rule sentence with some discussion of your cited case, followed by analysis and then a conclusion, you can't really do that if you've only skimmed the case or you don't know what the rule of the case is. And here's where I'm going to connect the case briefing part to the IRAC part. If you get in the habit of briefing the cases that are most important to your research, it makes drafting the IRAC a much easier exercise because you've already organized in writing all your thoughts about the case. So let's do that here. Let's talk about the key parts of Correa. What were the facts in the holding? Well, if you read Correa, you know that it involved two women that were staying at a motel. A gentleman broke into the room and absolutely he threatened the women there. And there seemed to have been some evidence that he also stole some pocketbooks or money that belonging to the women, and he was arrested, charged with the crime of burglary, among some other crimes. Now, what was the issue in Correa as it related to the dwelling part? Now, here's where I'm going to tell you that there's absolutely other issues in Correa. As we see when cases go up on appeal, the party bringing the appeal raises all kinds of legal issues. And so it's entirely possible, as it is here, that there's parts of the Correa case that I don't want to ever say, oh, we don't have to read them, but the truth is we don't have to spend as much time with those parts of the case because they don't pertain to our legal issue. One of the issues on appeal in Correa is this one here. Does the motel where this action took place qualify as a dwelling under the Massachusetts burglary statute? And what did the court decide here? The court said yes. The court said that the appeal by this gentleman, this defendant, to say that a burglary that took place at a motel was not a dwelling, the court rejected that argument, and they said a motel is a dwelling. So far we've had the facts here. We see what the issue is in the holding. But let's not jump into writing the IRAC yet. Let's first understand why the court reached this conclusion. Why did the court decide that a motel is a dwelling? So if we were together, I'd ask you to pause this video and we could have a discussion together. Instead, you can see that I've raised this issue on the discussion board. But let's do it together. Why is this a dwelling? What does a dwelling even mean? Well, the court says that the statute doesn't define dwelling. Very often when courts do analysis, the first thing they look at is to see whether they've been given a definition of a term. And here, the Massachusetts burglary statutes use the word dwelling, but don't define it. Okay, well, that doesn't answer for us what a dwelling is. All we know is that we don't have a statutory definition of it. So what's the next step? Well, the court then explains to us that when the court is asked to define a term and the statute isn't providing a definition for them, a very common analysis is to look at a usual or regular dictionary definition of that term. Why would the court give the term a meaning that it doesn't have? So let's look at dictionary definition. And the court also looks to common law. What was the law like before all the statutes? Because as you know, all of our laws in the United States evolve from common law. So the court explains that at common law, the crime of burglary was actually an offense against a person's place of habitation. In fact, the first burglary statutes only involved homes. And so, or not even statutes, but the first burglary common law involved homes. And therefore, the structure that was invaded where the crime took place had to be what was called a place of habitation. And the court goes on to explain that a place of habitation is a place where a person sleeps. So see what the court did here. It gave us a definition. It says we don't have one in the statute, but if we look at dictionary definitions of dwelling, and we look at common law, we learn that a dwelling is a place where people habitate, and habitation is a place where people sleep. And the court relies on other existing precedent explaining that a hotel has already been considered a place of habitation because people sleep there. So the same is going to be true of a motel. And that is how the court walked through its analysis to say that yes, to ultimately conclude this bottom sentence here, a motel is like a hotel, a place of habitation. But notice that the court, I'm just going to go back a slide. The court didn't just jump and say, oh, a motel is a place of habitation. That's too quick. Courts like to walk through their analysis. If you were doing a case brief, we would call this the rationale. How did the court get from point A, which is a motel a dwelling, to conclude, yes, it is? And here in this PowerPoint slide here, I've outlined for you how the court got there. Now, if you have Correa in front of you, which I'm actually going to do right now and bring it up on my computer, you can see the section of the case where the court discusses this. So let me jump to Correa really quick. I have too much other stuff open on my computer, and it's taking me too long, but there it is. Sorry about that. Here's Commonwealth versus Correa on my computer. And you can see that we can read the case, and the case, of course, begins after the headnotes down here. Sorry to make you dizzy by scrolling. And you can see we can read the facts of the case here. And then under headnote number 1 and number 2, it actually says the issue raised by the defendant appears to be a matter of first impression within the Commonwealth, which means that it hasn't been decided before. And the issue, of course, is whether a motel is a dwelling. And basically this entire paragraph here and into headnote number 4 is what I've summarized in the PowerPoint. It says the statutes dealing with the crime of burglary do not define dwelling. And if it doesn't define dwelling, then we give that statute its usual and accepted meaning consistent with the statutory purpose, and we look to common law. And you can see this paragraph here discusses the evolution of burglary statutes through common law. One test that has been used for the purposes of a burglary prosecution is whether a structure is a place to sleep in. And then the court goes on to say that prior cases have held that boarding houses and similar structures are dwellings, and a motel is similar to a hotel. I'm not going to use up the PowerPoint to just read to you that parts of the decision, but I really wanted you to see how the court walked through that analysis. And if you need to, again, please pause this video and go back and look at those I think there are 2 or 3 paragraphs in Correa that I've summarized here where the court explains to us how it reached its conclusion. So before we move on and then get to the last step here, which is actually writing the IRAC paragraph, and we have Correa sitting in front of us, and we have a mini case brief of Correa, which hopefully you've written out on your own, and if not, we have the one here on the PowerPoint, is we want to kind of take a step back and we want to say, what did we learn from this case precedent about the meaning of dwelling? Remember that we're trying to build this IRAC analysis about dwelling, because if we have an answer to whether the Danvers Executive Travel Lodge is a dwelling, that will help us ultimately answer the big issue of whether Bob has committed a burglary. Remember, we have to answer all the mini issues first, and the mini issue being, the sub issue being dwelling and whether the Danvers Executive Travel Lodge is a dwelling. So I think what we've learned here is this: a dwelling is a place of habitation, a place where a person sleeps. Now, you might come out with slightly different wording than this, but that's really the main takeaway from the Correa case. We know what the holding was. We know in that case they decided that a motel is a dwelling. But the takeaway rule that when we can apply to a numerous other hypothetical and real scenarios is this. A dwelling is a place of habitation, a place where a person sleeps. So again, we're nearing the end here, and I want to do one final video where we put the IRAC together. So I'm going to pause this here, and I will see you on video number 3, where we bring this all together and we analyze this issue and write it all out.